How important is acoustic comfort and audio accessibility in the built environment today? We've got some interesting stats. 69% of architects say acoustic comfort is important. 76% of construction professionals agree, but just 30% of architects rate it as extremely important. So Julian, as a member of the architecture profession, how do you rate it and how important is it today?
I'm definitely in the 69%, and I've always felt it extremely important. Those things have been super important to me, from having great sound in a club when you're hearing music and when you hear live music. All those things really, really kind of matter to me. But in the workplace, I think that people notice, they have an emotional reaction to when the sound is bad, but they don't plan for how it's going to be good. So I think generally we only really feel it when it's too late.
Yes. Julian, would you agree? We feel it when it's too late. People walk out rather than finding the right place for them.
Yeah, most people's relationship with sound is completely unconscious. So most of the time it's affecting us, so we're not conscious of the way it is. It changes our physiology, our heart rate, breathing, hormone secretions, changes our emotions, how we feel. It changes how well we can think, which is pretty critical in offices. We all know that feeling of, shut up, I'm trying to think, especially if you can hear language. And it changes our behaviour as well, how sociable we are, how helpful we are, how well we work in teams. So these things are going on all the time, but most people are completely oblivious because the world's noisy, we're very distracted, and we are much, much more orientated around what we see than what we hear. So as an example of that, there are many, many design awards in the world. Almost none of them are for how things sound. They're all for how things look. We're very ocular.
Do you think that's about the language we use?
Partly. Different people have different primary ways of perceiving the world. I'm entirely auditory. That's my life. So, music affects me deeply. I can't do anything else. If there's music playing, don't talk to me, because I can't separate the two things. Most people are primarily visual. Some people are tactile. Some people are olfactory. It's different from person to person. But not that many people are primarily auditory. So I think the world is run by people who are very visual. And so, for example, we teach our children how to read and write, not how to listen, which to me is crazy.
But is it something that people just aren't aware of, or they can't voice, but they actually feel?
Especially now, we know from research that attention spans are getting shorter and shorter because of the amount of input we have. The distractions. Don't get me started on reels and social media and the way these things are affecting young people now. So if you're looking at your hand for hours and hours, you're not paying attention to the sound around you. And I think people's relationship, even with music, is changing. I mean, I can't have music on and do anything else, but I see people on the tube listening to music and reading a book at the same time, and I don't know how they do that. So I think, our relationship to sound is changing, and not in a good way. It's becoming more of a veneer, something that you can set aside, something you don't pay attention to, which is why a lot of my work is based around the idea of conscious listening. Listening is different from hearing. Listening is a skill, and it's a skill that architects need to develop, and not many have, unfortunately, because they spend so little time training on acoustics and how spaces sound. Conscious listening is different from hearing, and it's a very important aspect of designing these spaces which are healthy and productive.
Marion, do you feel that Julian's got it right, that there are very few people who are committed to making better spaces in an auditory sense?
I think so. My experience with sound was very much taking sound for granted. So I was a semi-professional dancer, and I had a couple of nightclubs. So at that point in my life, sound was just there, and I didn't have to make an effort to connect with people. I was just able to hear. So when I lost my hearing in my mid-20s is when I had to start putting effort into understanding people. And I guess everything became a lot more intentional. After I lost my hearing, I noticed that I had to ask people to speak differently. And then I noticed that even though that was happening, there was an echo that would take over the conversation. And I couldn't put my finger on it, so I couldn't describe the poor acoustics at the beginning. I wasn't even using the word acoustics. Most of my life I didn't. So then, in order for me to explain it to more and more people, I had to first learn what the problem was and then describe it in a way that in 30 seconds at the beginning of a conversation, I could say, sorry, can we please close the window? There's noise coming from outside. And also, please can you stop slamming that door? And oh, the chairs, please stop dragging the chairs. They're driving mad. And with hearing aids, all of that is being picked up. And then there's a huge number of people that experience the same, maybe not at the same level of annoyance or disturbance, but it's constantly an occurring event.
So is the built environment already addressing this, Charlie? I mean, you've been involved in commissioning a large number of office spaces. Do you think it's something people are aware of?
Well, I think that historically, the real estate industry has been very poor at understanding how people use space and what they want from space. And that really has been led by the commercial realities of you design a space, you grant a lease, somebody is taking that lease based on the commercial terms and the visual appeal of that space, but they're not using it. So they're not really having an understanding of the acoustic experience. And developers don't really care because once the lease is in place, it's there for 5 years, 10 years. There's no incentive to think harder about what that experience in that space actually feels like. So I think historically that's been a real issue. I think that's changing, but change doesn't happen particularly fast. And it's changing because occupiers are actually demanding that change. So they're demanding better, and better comes in many different forms, giving people choice of how they can work in space, which is, to some extent, as we see changes in work behaviour, we require more acoustic privacy, visual privacy. We need to be able to jump on a video call, but we don't really want to do that in an open plan environment. So how are we designing space that accommodates those changes in work behaviour? And the acoustics is a very real piece of that. I think part of the problem, though, whilst it's changing, or whilst the providers of space, developers, investors, operators, are becoming more aware of those occupier needs, the issue with acoustics is it's not obvious, and customers, clients, occupiers are making decisions. They're often making decisions that are based on an unconscious response to something. So we can tell ourselves that people decide whether they take space or not, or leave space based on price, and that is a factor. But we know from our research and our data that actually the top 2 reasons for people leaving space are really bad toilets and really bad Wi-Fi. Then if you go beneath that, actually, if the space doesn't feel right, it may not even be a conscious awareness that acoustically there's an echo, or they just are driven mad by the noises that sort of come in the everyday, that they're not aware of on a conscious level, but they're feeling, and that informs their decision making. And I think that's a hard one
but you never
to
get
communicate, because nobody says, I'm leaving because the acoustics are bad. But they will be making a decision with that informing that choice for them. So it's really interesting. There's a commercial consequence to getting it wrong. And the flip side is actually there's a commercial consequence to getting it right, which is if you create these spaces that are ticking all of those boxes, including the acoustics, you're creating an environment that is more comforting, more welcoming, more usable, and as a consequence of that, then people will decide to stay But if you ask them the question, I think it's unlikely they would ever say, list on the list of reasons why they stay or go, the acoustics.
So I think
But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed, sorry.
two really strong points there. One, in typical longer leases, people don't know what they're buying acoustically, and they're going to do a fit out, and it'll change with that and with the people in it. And the second is the point that people don't know how to articulate. They've hardly even understood its point about acoustics. So the kind of drive from those who are using the space is quite low, except I would say in restaurants. I think we might, restaurants are very obvious. Gillian, just to go back to that wider question about where you think we're at with acoustic comfort in the built environment today.
So I think what was quite interesting, so just as a bit of background, in 2019 I had 2 strokes and I was diagnosed with an incurable brain tumour. At the same time I became a full-time carer for my mum with vascular dementia, my dad with motor neuron disease. And I started to realise that my experience within environments was completely different to before my strokes. So I'd go into environments, I'd find that my vestibular sense had gone, so actually part of the acoustics within that space had actually changed also how my senses respond to that environment. Then I started to do research, so I reached out to people that were neurodivergent or neurodegenerative and resonated with creativity as part of their role or function, so architects and designers. And I asked them about their spaces, and this is where I found some interesting sort of facts coming through. But one particular individual I remember, so she was saying to me she'd go to work every day, it's like you were saying in spaces, and they don't realise what affects them. But she was saying she was sat at her desk, she could hear the hum of the air conditioning, at the same noise she could hear people speaking in the corridor, at the same as she could hear the noise from the fridge, and she couldn't work or communicate or be productive. When her manager left, she'd actually take herself and go and work in her manager's room. After about 6 months, she ended up having to leave the company because she just couldn't work there anymore and sort of thrive. So my drive now is about creating environments where people can flourish, but it's not just thinking about the environment, it's actually thinking about that journey to, from, and within that environment too. So all those spaces get connected, and thinking about within that the sensescapes and the cogscapes. So we have to think about accessibility, which is that can I, and acoustics can stop that, but also that liminality, do I want to? So bringing in those questions when you're moving throughout spaces and looking at how all our senses, I talk about 5 sense receptors, but we have at least 9+ senses. And I think that we do need to bring in more of that test and learn and how people use those spaces and then take that forward as part of the design rather than starting each project as a new project and not thinking about lessons from previous projects. We don't do that post-occupancy that we used to, and we don't also bring in outliers as part of the design. So I was saying all the projects that are done, you have your steering committee, your leadership team, the people with the loudest voices that you're talking to get those decisions. But if you bring in those outliers, so those people that are neurodivergent, neurodegenerative, have different disabilities, you're actually creating environments that bring in more people. So I think acoustics is critical for that, to create built environments where everyone can flourish.
So you've made a really clear point there about how there is a cost to not creating good acoustic spaces. I wonder if you can talk to that, Ben.
Really interesting. Marion saying, you never even thought about the word acoustics before. I think that's quite often the problem. People don't realise what acoustics are. They don't realise why they feel the way they do. They just, in a noisy work environment, they just feel stressed, and they take more days off of work, and they don't realise why that is. And it's not until you bring up the restaurant example. If somebody is sat in a restaurant and they're trying to talk to their friends, they completely understand what you're talking about, because they're all having to lean in towards the centre of the table just to understand what's being said. When you talk about the work environment, they don't necessarily piece the two together. So you've got all these spaces that are designed to be beautiful. You might have loads of light, they're sustainable, but the acoustics just aren't thought about. And you say that the 69% of people, they understand it, but actually the results say that only 30% of architects are actually taking it very seriously and think it's extremely important. dMFK are one of those architects' practices.
I think people do notice it. So you hear very commonly people will say, "Well, there's this person in the room, and they always speak really, really loudly." I never actually say that myself. It probably means that it's me. But I think that's not a problem with the person; it's a problem with the room. And I think that's the key thing. And I think people are more aware of it, mainly through having to make Teams calls and, like you said, Charlie, not being able to find an environment to do that. So we had a chat the other day we were talking about surfaces, for example, and obviously how important it is to keep reverberation down and to get the correct acoustic quality. But before you do that, you've got to lay the space out right, so that I know that if I need to make that Teams call, it's a very simple thing. There's a place I can go in order to not have that experience, and that's a layout thing before you even touch a surface. And I think that has come into office design more than ever. And actually we met a few weeks ago, I think it was the office design show, which they should have renamed the acoustic design show, because almost 3/4 of the products there seem to be acoustic products. So I think that the market is recognising that, even whether it's little stuffy phone booths or whatever it might be, or furniture that is acoustically absorbent. I think the market is recognising it, and that's coming from people saying, I can't be in this office because I can't think straight. So I hear it.
I think it's very important to put the word appropriate in here, because we're not talking about making everywhere quiet.
No.
We're not talking about one size fits all, which is sadly where we are in the modern office world with open plan, where for some reason there's no evidence at all to support the idea that open plan is more productive or healthier. It's more economically productive because you can cram more people into open plan. But if, as the evidence shows, people can be 1/3 as productive in open plan offices because of the conversation around them, there is possibly a constant for the amount of work you get out of an office space. You can have 3 times as many people 1/3 as productive, or 1/3 as many people 3 times as productive. So we need to think about what's appropriate, and that's where modern trends like activity-based working, I think, are very productive. That's about the kind of work people do, and creating spaces which are appropriate for quiet working, concentration, collaboration, coffee table, water cooler, synchronicity, or whatever it may be. But I think, from Gillian's world, I've learned a lot. We also need to think about the people, not just the type of work, but the type of people, because there are many neurodivergent people who find certain sounds extremely difficult, and we need to create spaces where they can, whatever kind of work they're doing, where they can be comfortable and productive as well. So those 2 layers need to be thought about when we're creating any working space, and the word is appropriate. What's the appropriate sensory environment, including very much the sound in that space, for these people doing this kind of work?
I think it's about choice as well. It's about agency, it's about autonomy. As you said, you get people that are sensory seeking, you get other people that are sensory avoiding. Again, from the research, what came out that was interesting to me, a lot of people mentioned how noisy corridors are, but actually everybody normally has to go through a corridor to get from one space to the other. So it's also thinking about those in-between spaces for people as they're moving through the sort of the built environment. And people, again, it's that giving them the choice to choose different spaces. You mentioned about sort of the open plan office, but again, a lot of people in the research wore noise cancelling headphones. Some of them would have noise cancelling headphones or even having sort of rock music coming in, and that's where they'd be most productive. We're all different, so, and I can't listen to music and work at the same time. But it is about that sort of the choice. And thinking about the environments and explaining them as well, taking journey throughs and how they're used, because you might have an environment where suddenly people start using mobile phones in corridors, and then that affects how people transfer through space. If I'm using a staircase and a phone goes off, because my vestibular sense and the tumour, I could fall down the stairs. So there's a danger element with that. So we have to think about safety as well in these spaces.
I think if we consider this space that we're in right now, we told everyone we were having this chat in here today, the people who wanted the choice, there's phone booths and little meeting rooms, they're going off and working in those. But some of them, I don't know how many people here are half listening to what we're saying, but they're learning from a discussion that's going on in the room. So appropriateness is exactly correct, because one of the things you come to the office for, particularly in what we do, half these architects here are studying or learning, and so they're picking up what's being said. So it's not echoey in here because we treated the surfaces. You know, the people who stayed in here probably don't mind to sit and listen in the background to a conversation that pertains to what they're doing. So there is an appropriateness to it, and we need to make our spaces feel like they're places where you can comfortably absorb what other people are saying. I think that's a really excellent point, but also your point to choice. If we jump back to the layout point, if we lay our spaces out appropriately, people will stand up and go wherever. I mean, Gen Z and Gen Alpha will increasingly be comfortable with working 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, working in a cafe, then finding sitting under a tree in the park. And that we would need to design for that within and around the offices. Exactly what we're doing with you.
Well, every individual is different, but every individual's individual day is different from,
yes.
or hours, different from one moment to the next. The work we're required to do is different. So there were times, as for me, where I need that quiet space, somewhere I want to be feeding off the energy in sort of a vibrant area where you can hear that sort of background chatter and noise. And so the choice is really critical in how we design the spaces to allow those moments for everyone to suit however they feel on that day. You may have a good day and you want to be around people. You may have a shit day and you just don't want to be around anyone else. So how do we cater to those needs?
Do you have headphone arguments in your office?
No. Well, as in, should people wear them or should people not wear them?
Yeah.
No, I think it's choice, right? If people want to wear them, that's okay.
Do you
That's
have
absolutely
headphone
fine.
arguments here?
We have a preference that we live in an environment where people absorb things by osmosis, and it's one of the reasons you come to the office. So if people feel that they want to be acoustically shut off, then they can be, but our preference is that where they can be, they're listening to what's going on and learning. So
Yeah.
it's a thorny subject, but I think I had a sort of debate with someone on LinkedIn the other day on this exact issue, and he was like, well, you know, some of us aren't lucky enough to work in offices where we have the choice to be able to go and sit over here, but that's a case for just getting the layout right in the first place, and then hopefully you won't need to wear them as much. It would be better, because otherwise you're shut off in your world and you're not learning from other people. But that's not to say, you know, it's not appropriate some of the time.
Yeah, I wanted to add something in regards to an appropriate space and then the agency, and there is a perception and an expectation that needs to be managed. So if I'm looking at that space over there and there's a table in the middle, you know, I'm sitting on this sofa and someone's sitting on that chair, the expectation is, without articulating it, is that you're going to be able to hear the person sitting on that chair. That's the layout. Now, if the acoustics are not allowing for that to happen, because there'll be people speaking in the background and whatever happens, so then that layout now is absolutely pointless. And often there are open plan spaces, not necessarily workspaces, open plan spaces, and there's a coffee shop in a corner, and that's where you grab your coffee from. And then 5 meters later, there are 3 tables where people meet and have coffee. And then there's a bit of a lounge area in the other corner. But the acoustics are not allowing for these elements to coexist in the same space. And people have no idea. So you have the expectation, you sit down and you're expecting a lounge vibe, but there's no lounge about it, because and I'm not talking about my experience. So, I spoke to hundreds of people now about their experience with sound and hearing, and architects and professionals, and so there's this idea of you provide a space where the expectation is to be able to work or be able to have a conversation, but then the acoustics are not supporting that expectation anyway. And then people in those spaces can wear headphones or earplugs, or they don't want to have anything on their ears.
We don't tell people how to use the spaces. We don't take people through a journey through the space and say, this is a soft seating area, this is where you have conversations for 3 or 4 people. The area over there with the screens, that's a quiet working area, but why is that different from the desk? People don't necessarily do those journeys through the space and understand how to use them.
I think people are much more adept at just finding places that work for them than the previous generations were. I mean, we're doing a whole workplace piece for a big arts institution at the moment, and they're like, well, some of our sort of older employees want to be rooted in one place, but the younger employees are less that way. So I think that's working. I mean, I've never taken anyone around here, but I've just noticed people just start to inhabit spaces where they feel comfortable, they gravitate towards them. Maybe we should show them around more, I don't know.
But I love that point that spaces have an implication to them. The design of the space has an implication. I think we know that's for chatting between a couple of people or 5 or 6. But if it's not supported, if the coffee machine noise is really loud, which it is in a massive number of places, then that's going to be a problem. Ben, you were going to jump in.
Yes, in our own office, as you'd expect, it's acoustically amazing. Because we've killed the sound to a point where if we just left it like that, then I think people would be a little bit self-conscious about making a sales call or doing something making noise. But we've then reintroduced noise back into the space. So we started off with like a biophilic soundscape. The preference for everyone in the office now is music, sort of a bonobo style thing with nice relaxed music with no words. And it just means there's this incredible atmosphere. Everyone gets on super well. That's all because of the acoustics. We had people that used to work at home, but now they're choosing to come into the office 4 days a week, and it's because they really enjoy being in the space.
I think it's partly because it is very much with the acoustics, obviously, we're here talking about, but I was listening to Samantha McClary, who's the chair of the BCO or CEO of the BCO, and there was one the other day, and she was saying, yes, we're moving away from quantitative standards, although they're important, to qualitative, human-centric matters. And those are the things that are going to bring people back, and acoustics is one of them. But we chatted about smell, things like air quality, how you feel, temperature, all those things that are sensory across a whole range of senses are human-centric concerns. And the problem in this digital world that we live in is that we're sort of mostly concerned with what we see on a screen, and they're mostly representations. So we are much more complex organisms, and we respond to all these stimuli and we feel them when they're not right. And we chatted before about, you mentioned restaurants. I think if we look at intensely commercial environments that have to get people in and spend their money, they will appeal to all the senses. It has to smell right in there, the temperature has to be right, the acoustics have to, all those things. So I think that's where.
And yet, so many restaurants are designed with full of hard surfaces, and they need adjustment. And so many are not adjusted.
Well, that's their problem, yeah.
They think it's alive, it's a buzz.
They don't realise that excessive noise is killing their business.
Yeah.
You can have a quiet buzz. That's the thing that the restaurateurs need to understand. And the evidence now is quite interesting, again, from cross modalities, the way the senses interrelate, that if it's loud in a restaurant, we taste less well. So if you care about people tasting your food, turn it down.
That could be an advantage in some restaurants.
So when space is wrong, when the acoustics is wrong, how do you react? Do you stay? Do you go? Marion?
Well, now I'm going to whoever's running it, running the space, and telling them about the Sownd Certification. But I guess I suppose at personal level, it drives a lot of anxiety to begin with, because it takes away being able to hear. As in, you can hear, and there's a misunderstanding between being able to hear and being able to understand speech, quite different things. So generally in poorly acoustic spaces, I get a wave of anxiety sometimes, especially if I'm a bit tired. So if I'm at the end of the day where brain fatigue kicks in, if you have hearing loss and so on. But what's interesting is that only 25% have normal hearing. And in fact, if you've ever been hungover and you try the next day to be exposed to loud noises anywhere, it's probably more annoying and difficult to be around that than on other days, or if you have a headache. So those are temporary hearing differences, if you were to look at it from a hearing point of view. So I tend to either move, if it's an acoustically poor, if it's a poor design from an acoustic point of view, or I'm using my microphones, which I guess in a way I'm quite fortunate that I can channel the sound in the direction of the speaker.
I think we've got this figure that 35% of architects don't return to acoustically uncomfortable venues, which I don't know which venues they were talking about, but I mean, it'd be good to talk about other places that are difficult to hear in. Swimming pools. Don't know if you've got any much work in.
Can I offer my personal bugbear is hotel lobbies, where people are only in there for two reasons. One is to work, or the other is to talk to people. And in trendy hotel lobbies, they think the appropriate soundscape is pounding music, which negates both of those two things and drives me completely insane. So I'm very much a fan of the old-fashioned hotel where it's very quiet, very subdued, and you can work and talk. But you know that fashion, unfortunately, the world has got noisier. It's more intense. Well, we've replaced intimacy with intensity in many of our relationships, with the way things work in the world and with other people. So it's amped up all the time. And there are many environments where the sound is entirely inappropriate, you know, to what we're trying to achieve. And it's getting worse all the time, unfortunately.
I struggle in retail now. A lot of retail shops have loud music, and even if they don't have music playing, they've got like the DJs doing the stands. And if I'm on the escalator and something goes off, I can fall down the escalator because, again, it's affecting my vestibular sense. And I think there is a sort of a hidden productivity tax to bad acoustics within environments if people can't work as they want to within those spaces.
I think if I could just say there's more than acoustics at play here. There are four things about good sound in a space. So acoustics is the bedrock. It's very difficult to make good sound in a room with bad acoustics. But then you've got noise, and you have to think about that. So for example, in hospitals, we've discovered that when you train the hospital staff about the importance of sound, the noise level can reduce by as much as 20 decibels on average by them just behaving differently. So people's behavior is very important, understanding these things. So the noise level, whether it's HVAC, whether it's M&E, whether it's a banging door, all these things are important to think about. That's the second layer. Then if we're going to put sound into a space, we have the sound system to think about. And, you know, we talked earlier, Julian, about shopping malls. You know, I spent years auditing shopping malls, which are ever so often, they will have a life safety audio system that's only designed for alarms. And then somebody thinks, oh, we've got all these loudspeakers. Why don't we play music? And they weren't ever designed for that. So you walk around a shopping mall and all you can hear is and you don't even know what song it is. It's just irritating background noise on top of the squeaking escalators and so forth. And the final level, then, if you've got those three right, is what sound are you going to inject? Which is where I think, carefully chosen music, you're a DJ, so you know what to do. Badly chosen music is a curse in much of the modern world. But I would say biophilia is the most interesting element of injecting sound into spaces, because we've become disconnected from nature in the modern environment, the built environment. We have glass cutting us off. It's hermetically sealed, and that is hurting us because we evolved in nature. We evolved to listen to wind, water, and birds.
I remember you telling me back 20 odd years ago that where you hear birds, it makes everyone feel the world is right because you can hear the birds tweeting.
Because we've learned when the birds are tweeting, things are normally safe and okay, so it makes us feel secure. It's also nature's alarm clock. So it's a very good sound to work to, birdsong, and we find it easy to set aside. It doesn't inhibit our concentration at all. But there's reasons why biophilia is so important. You know, we associate greenness with life, because where there's green things, there's normally food and water and all the things that keep us alive. We like a view because we can see danger coming. You know, these are very innate, basic human needs. And if we put people in hermetically sealed environments which are entirely bereft of any connection with nature, there is a cost to that.
They're very regenerative, aren't they? Regenerative design.
There's a definite now leaning towards understanding the basic human need more in terms of how we provide space and how we design it. And that perhaps is a consequence of how we're becoming more digitized, and therefore the response to that taking over our lives is actually this more innate need to have nature with us, or to come together more, and that gathering piece is really interesting. So as we think about how we're designing our spaces, just in terms of the function of the space, we're not just thinking about desks in an open plan environment, we're thinking about what are the different types of spaces that people are needing and wanting to use, which is about coming together. It's not for us to prescribe how people will use that space. We're not saying to people, you need to work and you sit at your desk and you must work. We're going to provide the best possible environment that is compelling, that attracts you back to the space and others, so that everyone can come together. And I think that's will start to inform design more, because people respond to that. And if they're not going to come to your space. And again, you bring this back to sort of commercial drivers, because all of this has to work commercially. So, but I think there's a shift that we understand that actually if we do more on this, that there's a commercial benefit to it. If we do more green roofs and sustainable features in our buildings, rainwater harvesting and solar and PV panels, if we're doing more of that, then people are going to be more likely to come to our buildings and pay more and stay longer, and that's a commercial benefit. And if we create acoustically better spaces, people are going to want to spend more time there.
I think I want to pick up on the digital point. I think about this a lot. You know, most of the digital technologies in our lives, which we can't avoid, are representations. They're not reality. So when I'm looking at you in a Zoom call, I'm looking at a representation of you. You're not looking at me. You're probably looking at your emails. So it appears that you're looking at me. And there's a cost.
I definitely am if I'm looking to you.
Hope so. Yeah. But there's a cost to that. When I put the needle on a record, I'm listening to an analog image of the thing that got recorded in the first place, and that's better. But if I go and hear the orchestra, I feel something much, much more than if I hear it digitally. And I think there's a cost to digital representation across every part of our lives at the moment. And I think that what you're describing is us recognizing that becomes quite exhausting in all areas of our lives. So design has the potential to offset that. So in our office here, we've made a conscious decision that premises has a direct relationship to culture, let's say. So the more we invest in this physical environment, hopefully the more time people will want to spend here, the more relationship they have directly with other people. I'm not saying that all these digital technologies are not super important and will not become absolutely part of our lives, but if we just rely on them solely, I think we will suffer across all areas of our lives. And actually, you know, if you look at things like Dispatcho, I don't know if it's a club where they have beautiful sound, and Spiritland, all these listening bars that are coming up where they're really investing very heavily in their sound systems, just sort of an acknowledgement that good analog sound is something that people, maybe they don't know that they want it, but they probably need it. And that's how I feel.
I'm really interested in what Julian said about noise and acoustics, so them being separate, but whether you can mediate with acoustics so that you can allow noise. So, okay, there aren't that many trees in Charlotte Street, but say there are a few, and there's probably a few birds in them, and probably at some time of day they're quite noisy. So is there a way in a not full of traffic street to allow some of that sound in? And is the way you mediate the internal space acoustically important to that?
We actually had a case in the town of Lancaster in California, up in the Mojave Desert. We installed a soundscape down the central street of that town, which is called the Boulevard. I don't know what happened to the vowels, BLVD. It was a soundscape of nature, and it was done as a test for an extended period of time. And the sheriff reported that crime in the region fell by 25%, which made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Sound affects people. The same reason that, for example, TfL play classical music in tube stations, because we associate classical music with good behaviour and quality and so forth. And it has reduced attacks on staff and abuse and so forth. So people's behaviour changes in different situations. And you can certainly, it may be digital, but it's better than nothing. You can certainly play nature sound in places that don't have it. You know, I always feel sad when I go to New York and I see a bird on top of a walk, don't walk sign, tweeting at the top of its voice, and nobody can hear it. Its mate can't hear it. It's pointless defending the territory because it's absolutely inaudible in 85, 90 decibels of traffic noise. So, you know, half of humanity lives in cities now, and there'll be more than that in the years to come. And that's billions of people who have no relationship with nature sound.
But there's no surprise that your buildings, the ones that sell, have got beautiful roof gardens with actual birds tweeting on them. It's pretty basic stuff, isn't it?
It is basic stuff. I think one of our most successful buildings that we built was a timber building. We're a mass timber, so the frame is timber, the core is timber. You go in and you smell this. And interestingly, when we were building it, it's right next to a recording studio in Shoreditch, and they put we had a red and a green light and a decibel reader on our elevation on the scaffolding as we were building this, because if we interrupted their ability to record, there was huge fines that we were liable for. It was the only way we could get the neighbourly consents. But because it was timber, there wasn't your typical percussive construction noise, and we never triggered it once. We never had the red light alarm go off, and maybe that's actually sort of tuned to what you're saying in terms of nature, because we were using a natural product, and therefore the noise consequence of that was marginal. So it's interesting that noise was just a factor in sort of, it's not just the experience of the space when you've completed it, but actually the journey to get there. And it's a hard one to manage, because where we have buildings that are let in part, and we want to refurbish and reposition spaces, and we've done a number of projects with you where we've had to protect that income, manage those other customers. It's really tough. It's really tough. People don't like it. They don't like noise. You have to navigate that.
It's an interesting point about making noise visible, and that might have had an impact on why it was never triggered. So we were in the early days of research for the Sownd Certification. There was a lot of measuring before and after an improvement that we had to get in order to justify the ROI. So there were a lot of spaces that why would I invest 20 grand in acoustics? Give me the model and maybe I'll consider it. So we installed noise monitors in this food court inside a building, big hall with absolutely no acoustics. And you have, I can't remember, there were 8 or 10 shops. And they were doing sports evenings together with family experiences at the same time, and the speakers blaring and all that sort of thing. So we installed these noise monitors and we measured for 2 weeks. And then we translated that into a graph that showed what that means. And we got all the staff and we said, this is, you're hitting 95 decibels on a Saturday evening when you're also saying that kids with young, families with young kids can come, which is crazy at 95 to put a 2-year-old to listen to. So we showed this data and we translated it in plain English. So there were no decibels mentioned on the graph. There was none of that. It was just at this level that happens. So 2 weeks later, the levels dropped. If you look at the graph, not in decibel terms, it dropped by 25% to 30%. We didn't tell them what to do. So we just said, this is the level, maybe you want to turn the music down, maybe you want to stop clinking the glasses and throwing bottles from 3 meters high in your bins. And but we gave them some indication, and it was incredible. And it stayed that way. We had the noise monitors there for 6 months, and showing people noise, and it could change behavior.
I think we've established that it's very important, and I suppose what we want to do now is talk a little bit about how acoustic requirements are brought into projects. And one of those stats that's come up from Oscar Acoustics surveys is that only 14% of architects consider acoustics at stage 0 to 2, so strategic definition, briefing and concept. So at the points where you think might be really quite important to get it in there, ensure that it is taken through to technical design. So Julian, when does this get thought about? When does acoustics get thought about? Is it in at the briefing stages? Maybe I should start with Charlie, actually, 'cause after all, yes, we're starting.
I invited him today here in order, because we're designing his office at the moment. So he's been invited here today to get him in at stage 0. So there's your
So there you go, stage 0.
He's dragging you in.
I think
I dragged him in. Not dragged him, he wants to come.
it's not early enough. I think it should be stage 0, stage 1. I suspect it. I suspect actually too often, and maybe this is the interesting challenge, that too often we're having to go back in. So we've hit practical completion, we've fitted out, we're in, we're occupying, and then we realise, because I do also think it's quite hard to design for the right acoustic environment, because at stage 0 we don't know what our furniture is going to be. Are we going to have joinery? Are we going to have fitted furniture? Are we going to have loose furniture? What's our flooring? We don't know that at stage 0. Now acoustics can be there on our sort of concept, that's fine. But I guess my question is, how do we future-proof that allows us to then go back in and do it really beautifully and elegantly with the right solutions? So there's a need to be thinking about it at the beginning. There's a need to be thinking about, okay, now we're actually in it and we see, and this is the type of company that is using it, and maybe it's a call center, or maybe it's a firm of accountants who are just focused on their screens. Then how do you adjust that? And so often that the retrospective element of that is a real challenge.
But it's much cheaper to do it. The cheapest way
Yeah,
to do
for
it
sure.
at
But
the start, not
but
later.
yeah, but I guess my point is it's hard to get it right. So you can design and you can install your acoustic solutions,
But we sat down.
and you should.
We sat down yesterday with a set of plans of your office, and we said, okay, we moved 5 plans, 1 for smell, 1 for touch, 1 for acoustics, and then work out which areas were going to be deader, which areas were going to be more live, and to really think about the acoustic qualities of each of the spaces. And I think that is such an easy thing to do. All it is just shading the areas to 3 different levels, let's say, to get the thing going, get that discussion, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's what
And that's what we should be doing. Yeah?
We are.
No, but that's what we should have as therefore as the occupier of that space. So that's our starting point. You've got to have the starting point. And
But this is an ideal, guys. I mean, how many people do this?
Yeah, that's
Almost
true.
nobody.
Well, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, but what matters is that exemplars are being made, and other people are being, and we're having these discussions, and that other people start thinking about it. When we go to Chancery House, which was a BCO award-winning, beautiful office scheme, the last scheme we did with Charlie. One of the most favourite things I do on the tour is I go into the kind of public areas when you come in, and they're very live. You know, they've got hard surfaces and it feels bustly and clacky. And then you go into the meeting rooms, which have got your sonar spray on the ceilings, and it's like, and people immediately go, when you don't even have to say anything, they just notice it. So these things like the contrast in acoustics are really noticeable. It's just people haven't yet understood how to voice that, or understood how much pleasure there is in being in a space that feels like you can properly focus. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that we can only do great exemplars. So other people will then start to sort of understand that these things are important.
A huge kudos to that, but it remains the fact that American architects train for 5 years and they might spend 2 days on acoustics in that time. So it's just not a priority for many, many architects.
There's a lot of practical things that aren't dealt with in training, though, aren't there? Doesn't mean you can't change them in practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the best restaurants that serve the best food, have the best acoustics and design, all that are the ones that people go to. So in the end, these are quite intensely commercial matters. And at the moment, offices that are designed to sort of standardized quantitative BCO spec, and they're all roughly the same, let less easily than offices that are designed from a sensory point of view, including acoustics. So these things just become market issues that good designers need to account for.
It's putting it into that inclusive design vision at the start, stage 0 from project, rather than treating it as a technical issue down the line in sort of stage 4. So it's thinking about who you want to introduce to the space and make it as inclusive as possible. And that obviously includes acoustics and hearing and soundscapes and cogscapes.
I still do think most acousticians have a miserable life, though. I mean, they get brought in at the end when, oh guys, we've got this space, we've got a problem. Can you fix it? We haven't got any money left, but you need to fix it.
Yeah,
and that's
and
not
make
much
it beautiful
fun.
as well.
Yeah, and make it beautiful.
Which is
so
Really
much
hard
more fun.
when you're going back in.
If you could say to an acoustician, guys, we're starting this project, we want it to sound amazing, now tell us what you can do, their eyes would light up. But it's not often the case.
Can I just hear from Marion, because he's working with practices and presumably from quite early stages. Can you talk about when acoustics is considered and when you get those discussions about it with other architects?
Yeah, it's very interesting being in a room like this and talking about a certification, because when I lost my hearing, I didn't think, right, lost my hearing, better come up with a certification for the built environment. It sort of developed ground up and top down somewhere in the middle, because we were doing focus groups with loads of people that were dealing with different hearing challenges. And then actually a recent one was with Paul, where we did a focus group in November with architects, designers, and we wanted to understand, do we need another standard on top of all the standards that are already out there? And it turned out there was no standard for acoustic comfort. There are indicators, but there are ranges, and it's down to the architect, the designer, to decide which one suits best. And I think that's okay, but it's quite a hit and miss to get a conscious architect. Right? We have Julian and the team here. I think that's, people will be on safe hands. But if you get an architect that doesn't necessarily care as much about sound as they do about visual aspect, then it's easily interpretable. So we see this desire at design stage to be something simple, easy to implement, that doesn't have loads of numbers and thresholds and ranges. So that's what we did. So we developed a framework for acoustic comfort across different types of spaces. That doesn't mean a space can't be used for multiple reasons, multiple applications. But if you have a space that will likely host a networking event, for instance, and these are usually event spaces, and somehow, strangely, event spaces are being hired based on the occupational capacity, right? So you have a space, they can hold 80 people because of fire safety regulation. What with the acoustic capacity of a space, right? So we took what was only done in restaurants, where the acoustic capacity is considered to be how many people can speak in a space at a 1 to 1.5 meter distance, which is this, Julian and I having a chat with a beer in our hand. And we measured some of the spaces. As soon as you put 8 people in and 3 of them have a chat, it's gone. You can't have an event in that space. So we have types of spaces, and we have ranges that are below this number. So if you're below this number or at this number, it means acoustic comfort as far as we're concerned. And practices like it because we didn't invent new numbers. We're following probably about 12 standards that we looked at that exist, and they give all the indicators. We follow something called PASS 6463, which is for neurodivergent minds. But then we're drawing a lot of data from what's suitable for people with hearing challenges, how do hearing devices compress sound differently than people can understand. So all of that is now 2 metrics, your acoustic comfort. And I liked what both of you said. In a way, you kind of described the tiers of the Sownd certification. It's impossible at the beginning to design all the elements needed for audio inclusivity when you have no idea what chairs, who's gonna rent a space, what do they need in that space. If they're an accounting firm, it's pretty straightforward. But if they also have creative sessions and they have machines that they need to test in the office, and so we have the baseline acoustics, and then it gets to behavior. And behavior is how people behave in a certain space where the team is influencing that element. So we can't decide for a team of people that we've never met, never spoken to, what they need in terms of acoustics. And that's where sound becomes subjective, and for a good reason. And then later is the technology and much more nuanced. So if a team has 2-3 team members that are neurodivergent and live on a noise sensitivity spectrum that is probably on the right side, then there's some elements of design for that particular tenant, operator, or whatever you want to call it. And that seems to be really, really well appreciated. There's layers where design stage, as an architect, you're not going to deal with the third layer in many respects, and that makes sense. There's no need to.
We look at spectrum trait personas as well when we're looking at that action research and co-designing with people as well. So it could be misphonia, it could be complete deaf hearing. Different people have different sort of aspects that relate to those spaces, and it's hard to test all of that and bring that into the design and the standards.
I think that's super interesting because actually I realised I'd just dumbed down standards when you're introducing a standard, but I think it's become incredibly interesting because on the one you have these different levels of your standard, and what I hadn't really thought about until I'd met you was how people who have much more profound issues with hearing in offices can be accommodated within that environment. So it's been really interesting meeting you and actually thinking about those next levels of design, and also listening to you, Julian. And I think that they're actually sometimes quite easy things to accommodate. When we spoke the other day, we talked about the tech that we all now have on our meeting tables to allow them to work for Teams calls, for example. So the tech to record your voice is also being sent to that screen or to someone in Australia. But what are the opportunities, for example, for me to put my AirPods in and hear that person at the other end of the meeting table better, just as a sort of byproduct of that tech just being there anyway. So it's really interesting to now start thinking about how all these things can come together to sort of accommodate people with more
a range of things, and also thinking about the
and
actual,
potential.
the perceived, and the emotional.
Acoustics matter in a meeting room as well, because
Oh my God.
if you've ever spoken to a company, there's 5 of them sat around a table, the acoustics are appalling in their meeting room. You can't understand what they're saying on the other end, and it wouldn't look very good as an acoustics company if that was happening our end. So we've made sure we've got the treatment everywhere, and we've got the good sound system. So,
But even with good acoustics, if you've got you see, I've come to big meetings where a team might be 20 people sitting around a table. I remember doing a post on LinkedIn saying, "Look at this meeting, can't hear a bloody word," because you just. So what's the potential for us to be able to offset, or to improve, and just tweak what we're hearing around a live table?
So we're actually based in Brickfields.
Oh, okay, great. So it's one of our buildings, yeah.
And
no, I won't ask.
there's probably a couple of things I want to talk about, but one of them is I love the building. I think it's really, really well designed. And I've seen some of the empty offices, and I've seen some of the occupied offices. And yes, you have different. So some offices are so small that you can't have booths design in this office. So then that tenant would be reliant on whatever the building is offering. And then the larger offices where they can bring their own booths and they can carpet the floor and they can do whatever they want. But that's the point what I didn't quite, I wasn't able to make up. Where does the building owner stop the anticipation? Is it, the offices are, when they're empty, they're all the same.
Yeah. So to answer specifically, I joined the company 4 months ago, and actually the product is not where it needs to be. And so with this, we're repositioning the business, and one of the things that we're doing, this is a strategy that we've presented to the markets last week, is investing in the spaces to create more. And so in those empty offices, what are we now? We're now looking at all of our empty offices that we have across the portfolio and saying, okay, how are we improving those to make them better, to give people more value, a better experience? And that's both in offices, that's in common areas, that's providing more meeting rooms, more amenity, more service. So change is coming. In my previous company, where Julian and I think we worked on 12 buildings together. So over a 20-odd year period. That was a strategy that we deployed from the very beginning, and Julian, in fact, designed our very first building. So how we thought about that sort of carried through, and now I'm taking that strategic approach into workspace. So hopefully in time, not too long, you'll see some changes there in those empty offices.
So not just what's missing, but who's missing as well.
Yeah, well, because this is all, I think the real estate industry doesn't think on a human level, and this, what we're talking about, is a human dimension. And we spend so much time in offices. I think we got, as an industry, we got too caught up in the debate about return to work, work from home, remote working. It's not our role to really contribute to that conversation. Our role is to create really beautiful spaces that work really well, that compel people to come back and to come together, because that is what we believe to be actually how we're going to be working and coming together moving forward.
Where everyone can flourish.
Yeah.
Julian.
Which one?
This Julian. Gillian Demetz, sorry. Yes. Why are you sitting next to each other? How confusing.
Because we're not sitting next to Gillian.
Oh, you're right. In your experience, what tends to push acoustic design kind of up the list of priorities? Is it about people coming from, maybe talk outside of your work for Charlie, but is it people coming from a place where there's bad acoustics? Is it about people having a concert going experience and that they bring that to what they want from an office? Is it about having a different type of consultant on board? What pushes it up the list of priorities?
I think that the office market generally at the moment, if you ask anyone, is really challenged. So there's a lot of sections of the market that are not active and buildings that are not doing well. We happen to be operating in a relatively small strata of the market that needs to carry on. So for example, we're doing Tower 42 at the moment. That's a building that no one's going to let go. It's got to be redone. And not only is it got to be done, it's got to be done really, really well. So for us in that section of the market, it's quite an easy conversation to have, because we're talking with people who realise that if they invest properly in their buildings, they will see a return. So another project we've been working on, we've been doing a lot with GPE, and we've done a building on Piccadilly, which you guys did the ceilings. It's beautiful acoustically in there. And it was a sort of no-brainer to them that this was an issue that had to be brought in at the outset. And they're getting on some of their offices up to 400 quid a foot for those spaces. They're performing really, really well in that top section of the market. To answer
Is it in their briefing document?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, and if it's not, we make it part of it. But it's not only that. There's other things. They'll always have, this is our sustainability criteria, and they'll always be quite onerous. This is how we feel about biophilia. This is how we feel about community, and they're all in the briefing documents. So the Derwent Londons and the GPs, all of those big companies are thinking in that way. So it's not a difficult conversation to have. But where budgets are challenged, and the buildings are maybe not primary, they're secondary or tertiary buildings, they're harder conversations to have. But so we have to force those a little bit more. But they're not difficult things to do. So to spray a ceiling or to make certain rooms perform acoustically better than others, and we're chatting about exactly that at the moment on one project where the budget's not going to be like top. It's just going to be sensible design. So we then have to think about where we focus our attention to make sure that that there are areas you can go that have a sort of a different feeling. So I don't know. I don't find it a difficult conversation to have at all. I just think it's one of the, if you're a designer that's sensitive to human experience, which is what the market's asking for at the moment, that's what's going to get people in. Then you have to consider all these things. So we just force the issue.
The construction cost and inflation is a barrier.
Yeah.
That's a very real barrier today and we're seeing a lot of schemes in the market that are being paused because construction costs are so high that actually you can't justify, there is no viability. So when it comes to schemes that are progressing, I do wonder whether or not in an effort to value engineer and manage that cost, that acoustics will be pushed out. It's a little bit like marketing tends to be the first cost that a business will cut in a macroeconomic tough environment, and it shouldn't be. You should double down. So, I do wonder whether or not you're going to see the need for the likes of people around the table to apply more pressure to try and demonstrate more value from actually pursuing an acoustic solution.
I think it's about the education. People don't realise that. So you're right, the acoustic package is one of the first things to get omitted from the project when the budget's stretched. But people are already paying for the acoustic problem, and they don't realise it because they've got people that are taking extra days off of work, sick days. Our research shows that people are losing 26 minutes a day in lost productivity just that they can attribute to sound in the office.
And that's probably neurotypical, not neurodivergent or neurodegenerative.
But then that translates into one person 26 minutes a day is, if you multiply that over a team of 50 people, that's 150 weeks of lost productivity a year just in a team of 50 people. So there's no other part of the business that a finance director would look at and be completely happy with those sorts of losses.
I think we need to work on a return on sound. That would be the phrase I would suggest, where we look at all the numbers, which are, there's lots and lots of numbers now, but lost productivity, stress, absenteeism, staff turnover. Staff turnover in call centres can be as high as 80% because the sound environment in those places is so frighteningly awful. People can't tolerate it. You wind that down to a standard open plan office and it has an effect. So there is a return on good sound. And if we could start to quantify that and make it tangible, I think your life would be much easier, wouldn't it, Charlie?
Well, it's really interesting to turn it around to something that provides value rather than being a cost. Is a shift in the conversation.
Not letting it's a bad start.
Yeah.
Value engineering should be about adding value, not just taking it away.
But also, I think if I worked from home solely, which a lot of people do, I would still invest in a beautiful laptop that had a beautiful camera and a really nice set of headphones and a lovely microphone, so that my experience was how I need it to be and not stressful. And it's just like extrapolating that into the office, so that meeting tables are arranged in that way and spaces will facilitate the same experience, but just on a very tiny level. The tech that you use to just work from your study requires some investment and thought. You won't put up with a crackly set of headphones.
Well, you say that, but the number of CEOs I've had to pull up on the practice of having a laptop on the desk with the screen tilted back and a light behind them. So basically, you're shooting up somebody's nose and you've got a silhouette that you're talking to, and they have no perception of what they're putting down the other end of the line.
You're right. I mean, and I always thought it when if I ever go to a concert with my kids at the O2, and I'm looking at everyone dancing, and I'm thinking, are you hearing what I'm hearing? Because I'm not hearing anything. I can't hear the bass. I can't hear all this stuff. But these people are clearly not thinking in the same way that I'm thinking. I'm just trying to. I need to be able to hear all elements of the sound. So you're right. I think there are a lot of people for whom they just go, well, this is the way it is, and that's what doing stuff like this and creating exemplars is there for. Because when you hear it and it's good, you feel it.
If you're talking to the decision maker, who is one of the 60% of the population who have issues with sound, it's an insane. As well, 60% of UK adults, 30 million people, got issues with sound, whether it's hearing loss, tinnitus. I've got bad tinnitus, so I can't function in a noisy environment or socialise in a bar or anything. Autism, dyspraxia. That's 60% of the population. So if the decision maker is affected by noise, I think you can get their attention much easier.
You need to do a little questionnaire at the start.
Yes.
Well, I think
What else do you think pushes it up the priority list then, Gillian?
Well, I think a lot of organisations now have employee resource groups and affinity groups, so they have different people that are neurodivergent, neurodiverse, that are actually trying to make their sort of point known within those organisations. So that's pushing it up. But I think this whole idea about neuro-inclusive design and neuro-inclusive spaces, so you're changing the conversation from just around acoustics to sensory design and cogscapes, and thinking about accessibility, can I, liminality, do I want to move through that space? If you're asking those questions early on, that raises it to the sort of the top stage 0, stage 1.
It's interesting. There's a picture I always show of Chancery House, which is of a beautiful library that we designed in there. And quite often the response to what you just said is, oh, we'll have a sensory room or somewhere where those people can go and decompress from the crap of the main office. But actually it should just be designed through. There should be a library space, there should be a very noisy space, there should be, and that just so that your difference allows it is catered for somewhere in
yes, you have to think about that whole journey. Keep talking about the journey to, from, or within spaces. But people put in sensory rooms and think they've ticked the box, but then actually they put in rules around the sensory room to say, you have to book it first, so no one could just access that space. They don't think about desensory rooms. They don't think about how adjacent that is to other spaces. So it's getting all that. It is that journey. It's getting all that information in. It's looking at that co-design and co-research, bringing in people with living experience of those issues to make spaces more inclusive. And I think if we can change that dialogue up from whether we're just ticking boxes to actually we're creating spaces where people can flourish, then we're going to get better environments.
I do think that our emphasis is perhaps wrong right now. If we're talking about how do we convince developers, how do we introduce it into a stage 0 concept stage, those are important factors, but maybe the messaging should be on the occupiers that you can have this and it can be better for you, and the occupiers are then driving the decision making from developers. It's a little bit like when I think about how we design offices, we're not thinking about the employer, we're thinking about the employee. So we are trying to think about how they're actually going to move through the space and what their experience will be like day to day. Not, can I create a deal that's going to work for the employer? And then that takes care of itself. And in many ways, there's a parallel there by saying, okay, if we educate the occupier and the occupier says, I must have this, then it becomes a much stronger part of the conversation.
Do you think standards like WELL make a difference to that? I mean, there's a little bit of sound stuff incorporated in that.
Yeah, look, I think BREEAM, their neighbours, it's all good to have guardrails for developers, but no occupiers. And apart from the larger corporates who have people who understand real estate, occupiers don't understand what they are. What they understand is this feels good. I can see beauty, I can see PV panels, I can see a roof garden I can use, and this sounds great. I can, and again, it comes back to what we were saying at the start. They won't even consciously say this sounds fantastic, this feels really good. They'll just feel better about being in that space. And I think occupiers have got to start demanding it. So the education perhaps is more for the occupier than the real estate world. And then the education of the real estate world is, all right, now you've got to go and deliver that.
But beyond price, what are the red lines that you're seeing as a developer for what do tenants ask for that are non-negotiable, that are more esoteric?
It's changed fundamentally, and it's changed fundamentally in the last 5 or 6 years. The occupiers, it's more about permission now that occupiers actually can seek what they want and what they need, and that is about the design, which is what it looks like and how it actually works for them. That is about service. That is about amenity. There's a balance, right? So all of these elements other than price are really, really critical. And then as providers of space, we need to make sure that we're not over-providing and we're not under-providing. And that's dictated by the market, location, the building, all of those elements.
So do you think we can move towards a new renaissance? Because in the Renaissance, the human being was the center. It was all about human experience. So all the buildings, instead of being vast Gothic things, they became at the scale of a human being and about human occupancy. So designing experience, not appearance, would be a big step forward, and having human experience as the center of the process. So architecture being a means to an end, not an end in itself. Is there a chance of that, do you think?
I think this is where Marion's Sownd Certification comes in. You were talking about adding value to a space as well. If you can have a Sownd Certification that people they know that if they're going to go to a Sownd Certified office, restaurant, they know they're going to have a much better experience. And if you are trying to rent out perhaps an office space, people know already it's going to be a nicer experience. If you're going to a restaurant, people can choose to go to a restaurant that would be Sownd Certified, so they can actually have a proper conversation with their friends instead of just going for food and getting out of there to a place they can go and have a conversation.
Do you conceive of any bars having Sownd Certification? You were saying that you find it hard to be in a noisy bar.
Yeah.
Can you conceive of bars having it?
It started. So this is how Marion and I met, actually.
At a bar?
It was on LinkedIn, but we got introduced. But he asked if I'd be interested in helping him create the world's first acoustic borough in Hackney. And that started. I said I would, we'll spray these 3 bars for free, but I want to make a film out of it. And this film was far better than anyone expected. It's called Now Hear This, The Sound Revolution. It's already won Best Documentary at the Barcelona and the Berlin Film Festivals, with more to come. And that gets released later on this year, and it's like a human story, but also it's about the acoustic finishes. So we're hoping that's going to go onto streaming services as well, just to educate the public. I think that's what we need to start doing. We can educate the public with things they understand, going to a bar, going to a noisy restaurant. That will then translate and move through into the workplace as well.
I think, we were talking earlier about, my partner and I, we go to certain restaurants. That's our happy place that we would go, and we feel good in there. And I know the acoustics to be great in there, and it feels to us like at the end of a night there, we feel relaxed, and it feels like it's cuddling up on the sofa almost. It's really, really close acoustically. So these things, I think people do experience and make choices based on those things, and without maybe realizing it, and they just like it in there. We could all go together.
So the start of this conversation was people don't actually understand that acoustic comfort is what they need most of the times. So coming from my own story, I went up that ladder to kind of see, okay, I'm having this problem. Who else is having this problem? It's probably just me. And then I started an audiology company. So I ended up speaking to hundreds of people about their hearing problems. And the majority of them didn't have a diagnosed hearing problem. They just hated noise. They couldn't get their head around why is everything so noisy. Right? That's how we describe a poorly designed place. So I measured 100 spaces for noise. They're different data points. This is before the pandemic. Analyzed all that data, and there were so many variables, because you have different types of spaces, we have different noise levels and different times of the day, different days of the week, etc., etc. And then we did an analysis, subjective response to those noise levels. So we would ask people in those spaces, can you have a conversation? Is this pleasant for you? And so on. And then we took that data and we realized that the venue operators didn't want to retrofit. They didn't want to change that because the space was full. The fact that 86% of people don't come back to a noisy place, that's another matter. But they couldn't see it. It's very intangible to say, well, how do I know that those people don't come back? In the workspace, we moved in the workspace, and some people don't want to work from home because it's noisy. They have children. Generally, residential spaces are not treated acoustically very well. So they want to go in the office because there's a phone booth, there's a quiet space, and then there are people in noisy offices who would want to work from home because it's quieter and they can have meetings. So noise does push people into taking decisions. They just can't really put their finger on it. And this whole back and forth with research is there a way for people to know which spaces are and which spaces aren't acoustically comfortable? And we don't call it acoustic comfort, we call it Sownd Certified because it resonates instantly. So then the Sownd Certification is different from WELL and BREEAM because it's not for the developers. It's not for acoustic consultants or architects. There are elements that architects need in the Sownd Certification in order to make it available to the public. So if there's a badge, you scan it as an individual and it tells you what room is sensory designed. Some places, you probably know, Julian, they have the quiet place tag on them, and they're anything but quiet when you put 4 people in them, or they have music on. It's quiet because there's nobody there. But so all these are then clarified and managed, and people know where to find these spaces, and that will create demand. It will probably take a bit of time until the employer will say, I want a Sownd Certified office. But that's where JLL actually said that building owners should be our clients. And then everyone is pointing at people, and I think everyone needs to understand acoustic comfort differently, and then everyone will see the benefit of it.
There's an education job to do at all levels, and it starts, as I said at the beginning, with school. We don't teach our children how to listen, which is nuts. Now, if we taught children how to listen, how much more of that education would they receive? And what a different world we would live in, with people listening without judging, being able to make difference into a positive thing instead of an anemic or dangerous thing, which is where we are right now with polarization. So it's a much bigger societal issue than not listening. And this is the challenge of my life. Almost everybody thinks they listen well, almost nobody does. So we have a wall of denial in the world. And this is, the reason for the lack of design, the lack of consciousness of this issue. And if we could come up with a return on sound, that would be great, turning it positive. There's certainly a lot of cost of bad sound, which we know about. But it's got to come from every level: the occupants, the employers, the developers, the owners, the architects, the interior designers, everybody, the acousticians. I'm always berating acousticians because they'll come out with figures about vibrations in soffits and things. And they say, I don't care. If there's nobody in a space, it doesn't matter. It's about the people in the space and the experience of the space.
I was just thinking about that because I was just listening to, because we're sitting in a room here, there's probably how many people in here? Another 10 or 15 people working in this room. I've said to them in advance, we're having this chat, and I'm listening to them kind of whispering, behaving in a way that allows us to do this. So there is a behavioural piece within how you manage your business as well. Hopefully, are you guys really annoyed? Don't know. If they need to go and have Then whatever. Some of them are listening, but if they want to go and have a chat, they know they can do it through design in another place in this office. But there is a piece to do with respect and awareness and understanding of how we speak in the office. If I've got a loud voice that cuts through, just being aware that that's the case, and because we can try to design for the worst case, or we can also educate within our own businesses about how we behave around each other, given that we all sort of work in quite dense environments. That's a whole other, when you said education, that's exactly what I just written down, but that's also important, just awareness.
Yeah, I mean, to break the fourth wall, that's why I'm delighted to be here today. I don't know who's going to watch this. I hope lots of people.
My mum is going to watch this.
We need some of your 150 million views.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm making a dent with lots and lots of views of the TED Talks, which is great. But actually, my TED Talk about speaking has been seen by 6 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening. And both of those have been seen by many, many, many more times than my TED Talk on designing with the ears, which has affected lots of acousticians and architects. So, I do talks to the American Institute of Architects. We had 1,000 last time, which is great, but there's a lot more than 1,000 architects in America. So, making a dent is good, but this is an enormous job that we've got to transform the world's understanding of sound from nothing, ignoring it completely at all levels, from school right up to, massive building owners and employers. It's a huge job. So
I think
let's get at it, guys.
We're winning the argument now that sound matters. People are starting to understand that, but it's rarely transforming into action. I think that's the bridge we've got to gap. We've got to.
I mean, also in politics, I've never heard a politician say, "Vote for me, I'll make it quieter." But we know noise is a huge killer. It's an enormous environmental blight on society in every way, just behind air pollution, actually, as a killer. So at every level, we have work to do.